Washington, 1971. The gold is gone, stripped from the dollar like paint scraped from an old canvas. Every nation on earth carries debt. Trillions of it. The United States owes. Japan owes. Germany owes. France owes. Every government in the world owes someone. But who? If every country is the borrower, who holds the other side of the ledger? The answer is not a country. It is not a king. It is not a vault. It is a system. And the system has been running longer than any nation alive. To understand who holds the debt, we must go back to the beginning. Not 1971. Not 1944. Further, to the moment a king first ran out of money and needed someone to trust. In the ancient world, rulers borrowed. From temples. From merchants. From the men who moved gold. Across borders when armies could not. The creditor was never a nation. The creditor was always an individual, or an institution, willing to bet that the borrower would survive long enough to repay. That bet has never stopped being placed. It has only grown larger. The system has a name. Sovereign debt markets. When a government needs money, it does not knock on a door. It issues a bond, a promise to repay, with interest at a future date. That promise is then purchased by banks, by pension funds, by foreign central banks, sitting on reserves they need to put somewhere, by ordinary citizens who don't even know they hold a piece of their own government's debt. The creditor is everyone, and no one, because the moment a bond is issued, it enters a market, and in a market, ownership moves. Silently, continuously. The debt never disappears. It only changes hands. The mechanism has a name. The bond market. And it works like this. A government needs $1 billion. It cannot print it, not without consequence. So it borrows. It creates a piece of paper. A promise. Lend us this money today. We will return it in 10 years. And every year until then, we will pay you interest. That paper enters a market. And in that market, price is determined not by the government that issued the bond, but by the buyers. What would you pay today for a promise of tomorrow? That question is where all the power lives. Because the buyer who sets the price also sets the cost of the debt. And the cost of the debt shapes every decision a government makes. But the bond market is not neutral. It has players. The first player, the government. It needs the money. It sets the terms. But it cannot set the price. The second player, the primary dealer. The large bank standing between the government and the market. It buys the bonds first, then sells them on, taking its cut at every step. The third player, the foreign creditor. China holds over $800 billion of United States debt. Japan holds even more. They are not doing this out of generosity. They are doing this because it gives them something more valuable than interest. Leverage. And the fourth player, the one most people forget, is you. Your pension fund. Your insurance company. Your savings account. All of them hold sovereign debt. Without you knowing. Without you choosing. And the system grew. Not slowly. Not carefully. Like a tide that forgets the shore. By the 20th century, sovereign debt had become the foundation of the global economy. Not a footnote. Not an emergency measure. The foundation. Every war was financed by bonds. Every reconstruction. Every social program. Every infrastructure project that ever moved a nation forward was built on borrowed money. And the buyers knew it. Because a government that owes you money cannot afford to make you its enemy. The debt became a chain. Elegant. Invisible. Unbreakable. And the more governments borrowed, the more the buyers wanted them to borrow. Because interest never sleeps. It accumulates. Like paint layered on a canvas, each coat thicker than the last. Until the painting can no longer hold its own weight. The wave had grown too large. And the buyers had grown too powerful. Consider this. In 1944, the Allied nations gathered at Bretton Woods to rebuild the world economy. They created institutions. The International Monetary Fund. The World Bank. A new global financial order, built entirely on sovereign debt. Every nation that joined accepted the rules. Every nation that borrowed accepted the terms. And the terms were always written by the same hands that held the bonds. By the 1980s, developing nations were borrowing not to build, but to repay. The debt had become self-sustaining. a river that feeds itself, that never reaches the sea. Interest paid to creditors who used that interest to buy more bonds. The system was no longer financing nations. The nations were financing the system. And it has broken. More than once. Argentina. 2001. The government owed more than it could ever repay. The bonds collapsed. The peso collapsed. The savings of an entire nation evaporated. In weeks. Greece. 2010. Decades of sovereign debt accumulated behind closed doors. Hidden from the markets. Hidden from the citizens. Until it wasn't. The interest rate on Greek bonds went from 4% to 27% in 18 months. 27%. That is not a market adjusting. That is a market punishing. Because when buyers lose confidence in a government's ability to repay, they do not wait. They sell. All of them. At the same time. And the price of the debt collapses faster than any government can respond. The ledger does not forgive. But the collapse is never the end. It is the reset. Because the system needs the debt to continue. And so, it continues. The creditors negotiate. They restructure. They extend the terms. They reduce the interest just enough to keep the borrower alive. Not prosperous. Alive. Because a dead borrower repays nothing. This is what historians call the debt trap. And it has been sprung on nations across every century. The Ottoman Empire, borrowed to modernize, ended up surrendering its customs revenues to foreign creditors. Egypt in the 1870s, borrowed to build the Suez Canal, lost control of it to the British within a decade. The mechanism is always the same. Borrow to survive, or to comply. Comply, to borrow again. The chain tightens, not with violence, with paperwork. So who do they owe? The answer is now clear. And it is not comfortable. Governments owe banks that owe pension funds that owe ordinary citizens who owe those same governments in taxes. The debt is a circle. Claused. Self-referential. Feeding on itself across generations. The creditor and the debtor are often the same entity, viewed from different angles. But within that circle, there are those who sit closer to the center. The primary dealers. The foreign central banks. The sovereign wealth funds of nations with surplus. They do not hold the debt out of obligation. They hold it out of leverage. And leverage is the oldest form of power ever invented. The question is not who they owe. The question is who benefits when the interest never stops accumulating. That answer has not changed in 3,000 years. The debt was never meant to be repaid. It was meant to be managed, indefinitely, by those who understand it, over those who don't. Now you understand it? This has been the financial annals. The secret history of wealth, power, and collapse. Subscribe to understand the past. And you might just predict the future.